Hello, everyone. How's it going? I hope you're doing well. I'm doing well because today we're talking about music, and today we are continuing our deep dive into the discography of Canadian alt rock and pop punk icons, Sum 41. Now, as of the recording of this video, they've just recently announced their final tour that they're going on. So lots of dates in the States, some up into Canada, no Vancouver date. Come on, no Vancouver date, but that's okay. But cool, it's going to be their final tour. Opening for them are the Interrupters, who are a great ska punk band that I love and will probably feature at some point on this channel, either as a review or something. They'll come up for sure. So that kind of dates this video. Give you some context. This was an album I listened to a lot on streaming. It took me a while to find a physical copy for a decent price, but I did finally find one. So today we're looking at Screaming Bloody Murder. This is their sixth release, fifth full-length album from the band. This came out March 19th, 2011. There we go. It was recorded from January to June of 2010, and we're going to get into maybe that's not exactly true, maybe a little bit before, or the writing was before, some delay, stuff like that. But also really interesting is that this was released on Island Records. This is the last one on Island, and there's no more Aquarius on this album. So it's just Island Records. I think Island Def Jam or something like that. No, just Island. Um, and this is the second album produced by Derek Whibley, right after Underclass Hero. So whatever my takes on this album are, first and foremost, again, I think building on that production, it sounds really good. Maybe the stylings aren't to my taste, but the sound on this album is really good. So listen to it for that for sure. It's also the last album for that will feature their longtime original drummer, Steve Jocks, before he announced his departure in April of 2013. So on this release, we're down to a three-piece again. We're still missing Brown Sound. Um, so you can see it on the liner notes there or the back of the booklet, just the three-piece there with Steve. There are some really cool, notable musicians doing some research. We have Roger Joseph Manning Jr., who does additional keyboards and piano. He's uncredited, but for those in the know into kind of jam rock, alt rock, even a little bit of prog rock, he's known as a member of Jellyfish and the Moog Cookbook. So I think that's pretty cool. I was pretty stoked to hear that. Not that we're getting any of that influence on here, but it's kind of a cool connection there. So we're going to be down a member soon, but actually gaining a member as well. So even though they're not listed as a member here, they had previously been a touring member with the group, and they would become a full-time member. Tom Thacker from Canadian pop punk group Gob would join the band. He was already a part of the band, and he actually co-wrote the title track of the album, which is a really cool track. But all the guitars on the record were actually recorded by Derek himself. So even though he's on the album, he's still kind of uncredited, and he's seen with the band photos as well. So musically, I mean, it's called Screaming Bloody Murder. We're getting that kind of black and white look there. There's a, like that film noir kind of look we're going for, and you have some blood spatters here and there, and again there. So it's a much darker album than Underclass Hero, and maybe that's if we're thinking Underclass Hero was maybe inspired by Derek's relationship with Avril. Maybe this is inspired partly with his divorce with Avril Lavigne. Who knows? I think there's actually a lot more here. I mean, that's part of it. There's a few songs that are very heavily focused on relationships and breaking up and breaking apart, and those were probably influenced by that relationship. I think religion and critique of religion is also a common theme on here as well, and we'll get into some of those aspects. Some other interesting notes about this album. This was one that seemed to be kind of marred by delays on all fronts. Sometimes the band taking extra time to do the songwriting process, sometimes the label kind of sitting on it and waiting for the right time. So it just seemed like this wasn't necessarily an album that the band was kind of sitting on waiting for the perfect moment or honing the songs. But there are elements of that. And it wasn't one that the label was specifically waiting for the exact moment, but there's elements of that. So I wonder if that kind of led to this album sort of lackluster reception. People who liked it really liked it. But I don't remember hearing much about this album as I did Underclass Hero or even their follow-ups that we're going to get into after this. So the band, they initially entered the studio in late 2008 with the plans to record an EP. They did some recording, some playing. Their plan was to release that in April of 2009, and they figured out pretty quickly that, hey, there's a lot of material here, so let's turn this instead of an EP, let's do an album. An EP would have been cool. I like when bands do that. Regardless, so in November of 2009, it was announced that the band hired Gil Norton to be the producer of the album, and they're going to begin pre-production in December, start the recording in January of 2010. So recording did start in 2010. That part is true, so that part is accurate. But then Gil Norton was dismissed after 1 week into the recording progress, Derek Wigley deciding to once again produce the album himself, which I think is totally fine. I don't know exactly what the circumstances were over that, but based off of his work on Underclass Hero, yeah, totally produce it yourself. You're a really good producer. So recording the instruments begins on January 26th of 2010. They finished that part on March 17th. So they actually only had the vocals left, and Derek recorded the vocals himself in his home studio afterwards. So they were recording that until about late March, when the band relocated to Earth West Studios on April 7th to record additional songs for the album. I think there was 3 when I was doing research. I don't recall which 3, but I believe there were at 4, 10, and 12. So that's time for you to go. What am I to say? And back where I belong, I think there's no numbers back here. So I'm going to do mental math, and that's an anxiety I don't want to live with. So let's just say those are the tracks that he did on his own. So on June 12th, 2010, Derek reports on a video update that the album is 99% done. Recording was finalized on June 24th, a day before the band went on to play the 2010 Vans Warped Tour. So while they're on the Warped Tour, the album is now going into mixing. We're not done yet. December 2010, the band confirms that the album is finally going into mastering. And though the album has essentially been ready for months, Island Records is deciding to postpone it until after Christmas, not before Christmas, which is when we would see a lot of big records getting released. They decide afterwards. So again, it doesn't seem like there's one specific thing that kind of delays this album, but it does sort of take the wind out of its sails, I think. It's just sort of an album that happened. And broadly speaking, I will say this is a much more successful album than Underclass Hero. Underclass Hero, you're having this battle between kind of deep emotional ballads with their kind of rebellious pop punk image into sort of that heavy metal and alternative rock influence from Chuck. Here, Screaming Bloody Murder, we're flipping the switches on there. We're flipping the script. It's much a heavy alternative album. There are those slow ballads on here, couple pop punky numbers, but by and large, this is a heavy alternative album, which to me, it was quite interesting because I think this is a much more successful album than Underclass Hero. I think it works well as an artistic vision. But that said, it's just missing something for me because I wasn't really a fan of heavy alternative music from this time period. I'm still not. It's fine for what it is, but it doesn't speak to me the way some of these other genres that they're known for do. So that was quite interesting to think that, yeah, this is much more well done if you're into that kind of music. But musically, I might go for the album that's less successful, if that makes sense. So let's go track by track. This is a fairly lengthy album as well. So we got Reason to Believe, which is pretty good opener. It doesn't really capture the ethos or sort of the feeling of the album. The thing with an opener is I always want something that kind of captures this new realm that we're in. And there's some great tracks on here that would do that better, including the title track. But I think if they switch the order, have the title track, which is the second track, be first, I think that would be a better sequencing order for the album. So track 2, title track, Screaming Bloody Murder. This is the first single released for the band. They put it out on February 8th, 2011 in the US. It was released a day earlier in Europe. The song was released as a digital download only on iTunes and Amazon.com. Interesting take. The song had its worldwide premiere a month before its official release on January 13th, 2011, on the Detroit area radio station 89X. And then it premiered on AOL Radio a few hours later that same day. It's an okay song. I like it a lot. It starts really strong. I like how it starts and then it kind of fizzles out a little bit. but it's got a really cool opening riff, and I like that, or like a good repeating chorus riff, which is really, really cool. But the verse is not quite as sold on, but it is a good song, and I like it. And that's kind of my feeling on this album is like, it's a fine album. Not for me, but it's a fine album. Track three, Scum. How later can I swear yet? Can I swear yet? I'm not keeping time. Let's assume I can swear now. Track three is called Scumfuck, which is what the band going forward would call their fans. It's an okay track, not superly my thing, and it kind of feels a little out of place here. I think it fits a bit more in the direction they go. From here forward, they go in a much more hard rock, heavy metal direction, and I think that kind of language makes me seem so begrudged. But that kind of imagery and stuff works better with that kind of imagery than it does on here, where they're coming very recently from like a pop punk rebellious image to this sort of transitionary time period. Track four, Time to Go. It's got a Green Day feel, and not in a fun way, like not in the way you're like, oh, this sounds like a Green Day song. That's cool. I really like that. More like, this sounds like a Green Day song. I could just go listen to Green Day. So there we go. Track five, Jessica Kill. I kind of like the song because it is a little bit different than what they were doing before. It feels almost like an AFI track from a band that I'm not super familiar with, but I've heard enough AFI to say that this feels kind of like an AFI track that like 5 years before this they were sort of known for. So not from their early kind of skate punky days and not from their newer, more kind of theatrical days, but their transitioning period feels like that song on here. It's got a really cool melodic style that I like and they're going for. It's got like nice chunky guitar riffs and a really fun sing-along chorus. So Jessica Kill, one of the highlights of the album for me. So far, if you're going to check a track out, maybe check out Jessica Kill. Track six, What Am I to Say? Now, Sum 41, they just keep throwing ballads at the wall. And the weird thing is, for the most part, their ballads are pretty good. They're not, well, Derek specifically is not a bad writer of emotional ballads, but they just don't always feel like they're not that they're not warranted, but they don't kind of make sense given the context of we just went from a track called Jessica Kill. The next track that we're going to talk about is called Holy Image of Lives, so of Lies. So it's kind of like, where are we fitting on this? But it is a really good one. I really like the ending of the track. It sort of builds into almost like a piano bar number by the end, like a piano bar ballad, and I like that a lot. It's a fun ballad for what it is. Now the next track, so 7, 8, and 9, are part of what they call the Dark Road Out of Hell trilogy. So if you're into prog rock, maybe try listen to these three tracks in order. There are repeating themes. It does reference itself. It's not just that they took three songs and mushed them together. Lyrically, there's a lot of repetition and references and echoes. Musically, there's a lot of references and stuff. So it's a lot of fun. But I think other bands do it a little more successfully. That said, I think it's a really cool experiment for Sum 41 to try something new. And it's not a bad sequencing of songs altogether. It does drag on a little bit. Like there are times where it feels like they're forcing them to fit together more than they did naturally. I think if you want to check out like what progressive punk could sound like, bands like Coheed and Cambria or RX Bandits do that kind of take a lot more successfully. Or the track The Decline by NoFX, well known, I think that's like an 18-minute long song. But this, I would say the difference here with these three is that it is a punk tune, but it's more kind of hard rock, heavy alternative influence. So if that's more what you're into, this would be more up your alley. Well, I guess Coheed and Cambria as well, but certainly more than RX Bandits and NoFX. Track 10, which is another ballad. So it's like ballad, three tracks that sort of flow together, and then we go to another ballad. I like this one more though. I think Crash, the lyrics are really, really touching. I really like the lyrics on Crash. I think Crash maybe has some of the strongest lyrics on the album. Track 11, Blood in My Eyes, which is officially released on September 10th, 2012. It didn't chart, although it was nominated for a Grammy Award along with Crash. I would say this is my favorite track on the album. So again, Sum 41, sometimes it feels like they take a while to open an album and they don't always close the strongest. But if we're looking at that Sum 41 bell curve, they know how to fill an album. Not filler, sometimes filler, but all killer, no filler. That's there's some filler. You know, you get it. You get what I'm saying. Um, but I like it. It's got like that more of a heavy metal direction that they're going to move into, likely. I haven't listened to it yet. Likely more successfully moving forward, based off of sort of general notes and research that I've done. And it's really good, fairly kind of middle of the road track, but the heavier aspects of it, I really like. When the track goes heavy, that's what I'm into. Track 12, Baby, You Don't Want to Know. This was the second single from the album. It was released on Canadian radio as a single on June 15th, 2011, and then later worldwide with a music video on August 3rd, 2011. And this is more of a Green Day song, and it works a bit more. I like this song. This is another really good highlight from the album, back to their pop punk roots. Again, pop punk being sort of the outlier influence on this album as a whole. And I think another reason why people were maybe kind of lukewarm or didn't know what to do with this album is because the first track, Screaming Bloody Murder, that's a heavy alternative track. It's kind of sells, I would say more accurately, the album as a whole, what's on here. And then we're going to a pop punk number, which if you haven't already bought and you're not already a fan, you'll hear this and you might be confused, or maybe you're like, well, if I buy this album, what am I going to get? I don't know. You're going to get more so that heavy alternative stuff. But this is a really good track too. So if you're into that Green Day sound, check Baby, You Don't Want to Know. Track 13, Back Where I Belong. It feels like another solid track. So it feels like this album is finding its footing close to the end of the album. Like we're finally getting a good run of consistent tunes, and we got one song left from this album that's almost 50 minutes. And the last track, Exit Song, the note I wrote is because this song makes me want to exit. It's a closer, and it feels like their studio time was running up, and they're like, "Oh, you got to write the album closer, time to exit." And they're like, "Oh, it's an exit song," and it's not terrible. Definitely one of the weaker ones on here. Um, so that's sort of the track by track for Screaming Bloody Murder. Again, kind of like I said earlier, it's a very artistically successful album, and their Road to Hell trilogy is a really cool experiment that I would encourage people that are more into prog and heavy alternative to check that out, because it is a cool experiment. But I think in a way I'd rather listen to Underclass Hero, which I wasn't a big fan of, but at least I do get those kind of like saccharine, upbeat pop punk numbers that are almost like junk food, whereas this is like junk food with dried fruit in it. That's a weird analogy. If Underclass Hero is like junk food with airheads in it, this is junk food with dried fruit in it. That's a good way to put that, I suppose. Um, so there we have it. So after this album, we've got 13 Voices left. We've got Order and Decline left, and then we have their upcoming album, Heaven Hell, that isn't released yet, comes out end of March. And then that's it. And then that's the end of the band for now. They could always reunite. But there you go. This has been a really cool deep dive. So I'm excited. And if you were a fan of this album, let me know. I'd like to hear, from people that were a fan of all of Sum 41, which kind of elements they prefer, because this feels like a successful transition album. Underclass Hero didn't know what it wanted to be. This knows what it wants to be. I think I'm not as big of a fan of what it wants to be, but it knows what it wants to be, and certainly it's not a boring album. That said, yeah, I'll catch you next time.